We all know about the huge mechanical changes in Pokemon games as generations passed and gameplay advanced. Held items introduced in Generation 2, abilities in Gen 3, the physical special split in Gen 4, gimmicks that saw play in their respective generations, and so on and so forth. But what about the smaller, underappreciated mechanical changes? Ones that the casual player might not know, but actually made for great balance additions casually and competitively. We're going to go over these more under the radar mechanical changes and how they benefited and hurt certain mods competitively. I'm not including changes that only affect one Pokemon like signature ability nerfs, but rather game mechanics that affect many mods. Starting off with a good one is the Paralysis nerf in Generation 7. Paralysis is definitely an infuriating status condition. Since introduced, a paralyzed mon has a 25% chance to not move every turn. In addition to this, their speed was reduced to 25% of its original value. This made it essentially a death sentence for any sweepers, as it would have virtually no shot of outspeeding the opposing team. In Generation 7, this was changed to only half the speed stat. Might not seem like too much, but the difference is actually huge. Pokemon with decent to good speed stats can still find many outspeeds, even when paralyzed now. This means slow, bulky support mons who will often be the ones spreading the status cannot just use it as a device to gain the jump on them. Sweepers who set up speed boosts aren't hurt nearly as much now, as at +2 speed, you're back to your regular speed stat. Whereas you would have to set up fully to +6 in order to be back to your initial speed. This leaves room for sweepers to further set up and do more damage as the crux of Para isn't as overbearing. It sucks that they still have a 25% chance not to move, which is definitely not 25% in practice, but it definitely is a great mechanical change that doesn't just kill fast mons entirely. Another great mechanical change more recently introduced is the dynamic speed turn order. This applies to double battles and opens up a plethora of new strategies and plays. Before Generation 8, turn order was set at the beginning of the turn, meaning if anything happened throughout the turn to affect speed, it wouldn't come into play until the next turn. Now you can directly affect turn order mid-turn using moves, abilities, and items. This lets you swap in a weather setter at the beginning of the turn and let your otherwise slower mon move first by activating their speed boosting abilities like Swift Swim and Chlorophyll. Tailwind is buffed big time, as you will reap the benefits of it on the turn it's set, making it immediately impactful and effectively giving you an extra turn of it. Fast support Pokemon like Regieleki can use speed lowering moves like Electro Web to allow their teammates to gain an outspeed mid-turn and potentially nab a KO. Unfortunately, it does buff moves like Thunder Wave, which Prankster mons can use pretty reliably to neuter a fast opposing mon and let your ally outspeed and hit them first. But there is so much depth added with the dynamic speed change, and it really plays a huge part of how you think of the game and team building. Speed lowering moves are buffed, speed raising moves and abilities are buffed, Trick Room is even buffed in a way to counteract this. And it is all thanks to a small tweak that has the game check speed between each move instead of just once at the beginning of the turn. While we're on the topic of dynamic speed, I have to also mention Mega Evolutions and how their speed stats worked in Generation 6 to Generation 7. Before, in Generation 6, when Mega Evolving, the speed stat of the Pokemon's base form before Megaing would be considered. This saw relatively slow Pokemon like Beedrill running Protect in singles to not get outspeed on the first turn sent out. But in Generation 7, mons like Beedrill didn't need to run Protect as it gained its improved speed stat immediately, allowing it to run more coverage. This worked for turn order altering abilities too, which helped mons like Mega Banette, who gained Prankster when Mega Evolving and can now abuse it on the first turn it Mega'd. It also hurt Pokemon like Mega Garchomp, who lose some speed when Mega Evolving, as they're now slower on the initial turn than Mega, so definitely can be a double-edged sword. Next is a very needed change in my opinion. It is the Steel type balance changes in Generation 6. The Fairy type was introduced here, and my guess was that they probably wanted Steel to counter it, because it does make sense thematically, but this would make an already busted defensive type even more busted defensively while making it stronger offensively. So what did they do? They removed a couple of resistances that seemed questionable to begin with. Steel's dark type resistance was removed, but also kept in check by the dark type being countered by the new fairy type. The ghost type, on the other hand, became a lot more spammable, now only having one resistance and an immunity. So there might be some work in the future to maybe make ghost types a little less powerful, especially with Pursuit being dexited, but I think limiting the sheer amount of resistances the steel type had was an amazing mechanical change that still allows the type to be incredible defensively with its 10 resistances and an immunity. But now we have at least 4 types that can hit it for neutral damage instead of only 2. We went over a status condition with Paralysis, but how about a non-volatile status condition in Confusion? Yes, Confusion, an annoying coin flip between executing your move and smacking yourself in the face was changed. In Generation 7, which was a pretty big one for balance changes, Confusion was changed from a 50% chance to hit yourself down to a 33% chance. This makes the status a lot less threatening and less reliable to hacks your opponent. The odds are tipped in the favor of the Confused mod now, and is mostly seen as just a bonus competitively, being a secondary effect when you hit your Hurricane. This coming at the same time as the Paralysis nerf is likely due to Prankster Thunderous and swag play strategies, which involve paralyzing your opponent with Thunder Wave and then using Swagger to confuse them while boosting their attack to inflict more damage with confusion hits and the move Foul Play. Klefki loved to troll with this, and it really made games RNG determined, with the swag play user having a big advantage. This is further supported by the move Swagger itself being nerfed from 90% accuracy to 85%, along with Thunder Wave being nerfed to 90% accuracy. Not having to deal with a 50% chance to hit yourself, combined with a 25% chance to not move, is a big quality of life change that I'm sure everyone can appreciate. Confusion also has been through a bunch of very minor and weird changes throughout the generations, but none that mechanically important enough to mention. And while you have a lower chance of hitting yourself in Confusion, you should definitely be confused if you haven't hit the subscribe button. I'm on my way to 20k, and if you enjoy the content, I would love to have you. The terrains are field conditions introduced in Generation 6, a pretty cool concept that helped introduce the fairy type with its own terrain and misty terrain. But, well, no one really used them in Gen 6 since you had to manually set them, and there weren't too many synergistic items or abilities. But in Sun and Moon, we were introduced to the Tapus, who summon the terrains upon entry. This made them very commonly seen, as their effects are actually really strong when you don't have to use a turn and move slot to get them up. They each provided a 1.5 times boosty boost to their respective typings, besides Misty Terrain, which instead of buffing fairy moves, nerfs dragon type attacks. This let the Tapus and other mons who synergize well with the terrains hit extremely hard, to the point where mons like Tapu Lele could pretty much two-shot bulky resist with Life Orb or Spec psychic attacks. This was nerfed the next generation to only give a 30% boost to those attacks. Still a pretty good bump in power, since it is essentially a Life Orb boost instead of a Ban or Specs boost. But imagine if they didn't do that, and we had Rillaboom running around with even stronger Grassy Glides and Wood Hammers, or Regieleki with even crazier T-Bolts and Volt Switches. And I don't even want to imagine Expanding Forest being any stronger than it already is. This is a great mechanical change that still lets the terrains be powerful and relevant competitively without being quite as game breaking. Status conditions changing have been a big part of mechanical balance. Fire types not being able to be burned at all in Generation 3 was a big mechanical change to have an answer to burn spam. The same goes with electric types gaining immunity to being paralyzed in Generation 6 and having more counterplay to paraspam. I think an overlooked mechanical buff was given to the poison typing though. A pretty underwhelming typing throughout the generations was given a pretty solid tool in Generation 6. When using Toxic, a poison type Pokemon will never miss. This even bypasses semi-invulnerable turns of moves like Fly and Dig, where you would normally not be able to hit the opposing mons with other perfect accuracy moves like Aerial Ace. A pretty cool mechanic that is type exclusive and not an immunity. But a type exclusive immunity that isn't status based was given to the Grass type. It's the immunity to Powder and Spore moves that I've talked about in some recent videos. This is also a Generation 6 edition and thematically fits very well, giving them an immunity to mostly competitively viable moves. Most notably, Grass types are now immune to moves like Spore and Rage Powder, which they can take advantage of without needing to overcoat ability or the item Safety Goggles. The last status mechanic I want to cover is Burn. I mentioned how fire types can't be burned, but also need to bring up the change in passive damage. It used to deal a whopping 1/8 of the burn mon's max HP and damage at the end of each turn. This put it on par with poison damage wise, while also halving the burn Pokemon's attack stat. In Generation 7, this was cut in half to 1/16 of the user's max HP, which is considerably less chip damage to deal with at the end of each turn. This is great for many reasons. First and foremost, it helped nerf Scald a bit, which probably inflicted burns at a higher rate than Will-O-Wisp per match. It also gave the regular poison status condition more relevance as the only status condition able to inflict 1/8 of damage on the first turn. Burn can now be cancelled out by leftovers, while regular poison will make slow progress. And of course, this gave Guts users the ability to always run a Flame Orb and take less passive damage per turn while activating their ability. You used to have to strategically pick between the Flame and Toxic Orbs, since a Toxic Orb was better short term, while Flame Orb was better if you were staying in for a while. Now the Flame Orb wins hands down, as you barely notice the passive damage, especially with a comparable like Solar Power taking 1/8 chip damage to boost special attack in Sun. It was a great mechanical change which doesn't neuter the burn condition too much, since its primary use is to hurt physical attackers, and it still accomplishes just that. I'm going to finish the video off with another Gen 7 addition. This is the Dark type gaining immunity to Prankster boosted moves. Prankster is an ability that increases the priority of status moves to +1, meaning they would go before any other non-priority moves. It's an ability that can make even the weakest of mons somewhat usable, to having so-so mons have very important roles in a format. There wasn't much counterplay to getting Prankster encored, statused, taunted, or any annoying disturbance really. But with Dark types now being immune to it, we have solid counterplay. The Dark type is already pretty good, and this mechanical buff helps put them into the higher tier of typings in my opinion. You can blank a lot of common mons who rely on targeting you with Prankster boosted moves. It helps keep them in check, and you have to think a lot more when choosing your moves, as you can easily just waste a turn targeting into a Dark type swap in with a Prankster move. These little changes that we didn't have before can easily go underappreciated, and while we don't always have the most balanced game, it's good to know that some aspects of gameplay are being worked on and tweaked to improve our experience in-game and competitive battling. Which mechanical change do you like the best? Are there some that I didn't include that you think are underappreciated? Let me know in the comments, buds. I want to shout out the recent tournament winners from the Bud Zone Discord, where we just hosted a doubles random battle tournament. Congrats to Shiny21 winning the Battle Factory tournament in January, and Zoro Tatsuya for winning our doubles tournament in February. If you want to join the next tournament, join the server, as we have one every month with formats voted on by members. Special thanks to my Patreon and YouTube members as well, including Gold Bud Mr. Frank Beans. And if you liked this video, make sure to check this one out next. Thanks for watching, buds, and I'll see you in the next one.